It all started on a Tuesday, which is statistically the worst day of the week. Monday has the decency to be openly hated, and Wednesday is the turning point, but Tuesday just sits there, smug and pointless. I was on my front porch, nursing a mug of coffee that was more cream and sugar than actual caffeine, and trying to telepathically convince my lawn to mow itself. It wasn't working. My house, you see, is what a realtor would charitably call a unique opportunity with vintage charm. It's a 2-story Victorian that my grandfather, a man who collected hobbies the way other people collect stamps, left me. He also left me everything inside it, including a wind chime made from his late wife's silverware, a taxidermied squirrel wearing a tiny fez, and a general sense of creative chaos that had seeped into the very floorboards. The paint on the outside was peeling in a way I found artistic, like a Monet painting if Monet had been really into pastels and lead-based paint. The garden was less a garden and more a botanical free-for-all, a place where weeds and wild flowers had signed a peace treaty and were now co-governing the territory. I called it my biodiversity project. This little slice of authentic character was located, unfortunately, in the heart of Maple Creek, a suburban paradise where the color beige came to die. Every other house on the block was a flawless example of modern conformity. Their lawns were manicured with military precision, their mailboxes were identical, their rocking chairs were purely decorative. It was a neighborhood so quiet you could hear property values appreciating, and I, with my purple front door and overgrown lawn, was the architectural equivalent of a fart in a crowded elevator. I had managed to exist in a state of benign neglect for 6 months, mostly by keeping to myself and perfecting the art of the neighborly nod and scurry. I knew of the neighborhood's unofficial queen, of course. We all did. Carol Ann Higgins. She was the president of the Homeowners Association, a position she held with the grim determination of a warlord defending her territory. She was a real estate agent by trade, which meant her obsession with manicured lawns and neutral color palettes wasn't just a hobby. It was a religion. I'd seen her from my window, striding down the sidewalk with a clipboard, measuring the height of someone's grass. She looked like she ironed her garden hoses. That Tuesday, my luck ran out. As I took a sip of my coffee, I saw her. A flash of khaki and righteous indignation marching across the street. She moved with the unnerving purpose of a Terminator sent back in time to eliminate bad curb appeal. This was it. The beige reckoning was upon me. She stopped at the bottom of my porch steps, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. Her crisp, beige pantsuit was an affront to my comfortable, coffee-stained sweatpants. "Mr. Maxwell," she began, her voice devoid of any warmth, "we need to have a discussion about your property's presentation." I put on my most charming, non-threatening smile. "Good morning to you too, Carol Ann. Is this about the gnomes? I know the one with the fishing pole is a little risque, but he's living his best life." My attempt at humor bounced off her with the force of a spitball hitting a tank. "I am referring," she said, tapping her clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail, "to a list of violations. Per the Maple Creek HOA bylaws, Section 4, Subsection C." I leaned forward, genuinely curious. "Let me guess. The Biodiversity Project?" "Your lawn is 2.7 inches over the regulated height," she stated flatly. "Furthermore, your front door is a non-regulation color. Approved colors are listed in Appendix B. Plum Passion is not on that list." "It's more of an eggplant, really," I offered. She was not amused. "And that thing," she said, pointing a trembling finger at the silverware wind chime tinkling softly in the breeze. "It's creating a noise disturbance and is aesthetically inconsistent with community standards." That one stung. My grandpa made that for my grandma one anniversary. "That was a gift," I said, my voice a little tighter than before. It has sentimental value. Sentiment, she sniffed, does not have a measurable impact on resale value. She took a step closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hiss, as if sharing a dirty secret. Look, Mr. Maxwell, I am trying to be neighborly here. I have a listing at the end of the block, and prospective buyers are driving through. They see this mess. She gestured vaguely at my entire existence. It reflects poorly on all of us. I stood up, crossing my arms. I'm sorry my house is offending your client's delicate sensibilities. I've had a lot going on since my grandfather passed. I'm planning on fixing it up. This was, apparently, the wrong thing to say. Her face hardened. Planning isn't good enough. This neighborhood has a standard to maintain. We have a reputation for excellence. She took a deep breath, puffing out her chest for the final, devastating blow. Frankly, your house is an eyesore, and it's bringing down the property values for the entire community. And there it was, the ultimate suburban insult. It wasn't just about the grass or the door, it was a judgment. In her eyes, I was the human equivalent of a rusty, abandoned car on the front lawn. I, Leo Maxwell, was single-handedly tanking the financial futures of the good, beige-loving people of Maple Creek. She handed me a crisp envelope. Here is your official list of violations. You have 14 days to comply. She turned on her heel and marched back to her beige palace, leaving me standing there, my coffee cold, my morning ruined, and a deep, simmering rage beginning to bubble in my gut. I stomped inside, slammed the door, and immediately called the only person who would understand the level of petty fury I was experiencing, my best friend Dave. You will not believe what just happened, I seethed, pacing back and forth in my living room. I relayed the entire conversation, complete with a high-pitched, mocking impression of Carol Ann's voice. Dave, predictably, was howling with laughter on the other end. She said you're bringing down property values? Dude, that's a badge of honor. You're a rebel, a suburban outlaw. It's not funny, Dave. She insulted Grandpa's wind chime. She called my house an eyesore. So what are you gonna do? He asked, his voice still shaking with amusement. Are you gonna mow the lawn, paint the door beige, surrender to the khaki horde? Never, I growled. But what can I do? I can't afford thousands in HOA fines. I slumped onto my couch, defeated. My eyes scanned the beautiful, cluttered chaos of my living room, my grandfather's collection of antique maps, the ridiculous ship in a bottle, the stacks of art books. Then my gaze landed on it. Sitting on my desk, a small, squeaky rubber chicken my grandpa had won at a carnival and used as a paperweight. It was absurd. It was yellow. It was perfect. An idea, a terrible, brilliant, magnificent idea began to form in my mind. It was an idea born of spite and fueled by creative genius. Leo, you still there? Dave's voice crackled through the phone. I picked up the rubber chicken, a slow, evil grin spreading across my face. Dave, I said, my voice low and full of purpose. She thinks my house is an eyesore now? She thinks a purple door is bringing down property values? I paused for dramatic effect. She has no idea what's coming. What are you talking about? I held the chicken up to the light. I'm going to put up a sign, I declared. A big one. A really, really big, professionally made sign. And it's going to say, Future home of the world's largest rubber chicken. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in Dave's head. Then, a single choked sound, followed by the loudest, most unrestrained howl of laughter I have ever heard. The plan was no longer an idea. It was a mission. The first rule of petty warfare is to commit. You can't half-heartedly wage a campaign of glorious absurdity. You have to go all in. So, after my call with Dave, I didn't just sit and stew. I got to work. As a graphic designer, my laptop is my weapon of choice. I fired up my design software, the righteous fury of the downtrodden homeowner flowing through my veins. This couldn't be some hand-painted piece of junk. Oh no. That's what Carol Ann would expect. This had to be professional. It had to look official, as if a genuine, albeit insane, development project was underway. I chose a bold, authoritative font, Helvetica, naturally. It's the font of government forms and serious warnings. For the color scheme, I went with a regal blue background and crisp white lettering. Then came the centerpiece, the chicken. I didn't just find a stock photo. I spent 2 hours digitally illustrating the most majestic, awe-inspiring rubber chicken the world had ever seen. It stared off into the middle distance, its beak parted in a silent, eternal squeak. It was a beacon of hope for weirdos everywhere. Beneath this glorious image, I added a tagline in a tasteful script font, the Maxwell Foundation for Avian Squeaky Toys. It added a layer of bureaucratic legitimacy that was, in my humble opinion, a stroke of genius. The final design was 12 feet long and 4 feet high. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was perfect. Now came the hard part, finding someone to bring my masterpiece to life. I Googled large format sign printing near me and picked the one with the most blue-collar sounding name, Barry's Banners and Signs. I took a deep breath and dialed the number. A gravelly voice answered on the second ring. Barry's. Hi, I said, trying to sound as normal as possible. I'd like to get a quote for a large sign. It's for my front yard. Sure thing, Barry grunted. What's it for? A new dental practice? Grand opening? Something like that, I said. It's to announce a future project. The text should read, Future home of the world's largest rubber chicken. There was a profound silence on the other end of the line. It was the kind of silence that contains entire universes of confusion and disbelief. I could hear him breathing. I could hear a wrench clatter to the floor in the background. Buddy, he finally said, his voice flat. Is this a prank call? Did Kevin put you up to this? Because if you're from the shop down the street, I swear to God. No, this is completely serious, I said quickly. I have the design file ready and everything. I can email it to you, and I'll pay up front. The mention of money seemed to break the spell. There was another pause, shorter this time. The world's largest rubber chicken, he repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. That's the one, I confirmed, with a picture of said chicken, a very noble-looking one. Huh, Barry said. It was a huh that contained multitudes. All right, kid, send the file over. But if this is a joke, you're paying for the 10 minutes of my life I'll never get back. I emailed him the file. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Barry. I'm looking at your chicken, he said, and I detected a new note in his voice. It sounded suspiciously like respect. That's a good-looking chicken. Thank you, I said proudly. I worked hard on it. You want this on heavy-duty, all-weather vinyl, right? With reinforced grommets and steel posts for installation? The works, Barry. I want this thing to withstand a hurricane. All right, he said, and I could hear him typing. It's a weird-ass sign, kid, probably the weirdest I've ever made, and I once printed a life-sized banner of a guy's prize-winning ferret. But your money's green. I'll have it ready for you Friday. I hung up the phone, giddy with a sense of accomplishment. Operation Rubber Chicken was officially a go. Friday arrived with the kind of bright, sunny optimism that was about to be utterly shattered. At precisely 10 a.m., a large, slightly rusted flatbed truck from Barry's Banners and Signs pulled up in front of my house. 2 burly installers hopped out, looked at my house, looked at the pristine houses around it, and then looked at the rolled-up vinyl banner on the truck. One of them let out a low whistle. "This the chicken house?" he asked, a wide grin spreading across his face. "This is the place," I said, feeling like a general about to launch a major offensive. They unrolled the sign on my lawn, and it was even more glorious in person. The colors were vibrant. The chicken was magnificent. They spent the next 30 minutes hammering 2 thick steel posts into my front yard and expertly mounting the sign between them. They centered it perfectly. It was angled just so, providing a direct, unobstructed view to anyone looking out of Carol Ann Higgins's front window. They worked with the cheerful efficiency of men who were enjoying their job for the first time in months. When they were done, they both stood back, admiring their handiwork. "That'll do it," the first guy said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "That'll definitely do it." I paid them, they drove off, and then there was silence. The sign stood there, a 12-foot monument to my own spite. It was so bold, so ludicrous, that it seemed to bend the reality of the quiet suburban street around it. It didn't take long for the neighborhood to notice. First, I saw the curtains twitch in the house to my left. Then Mr. Henderson, Carol Ann's grumpy second-in-command, came out to get his newspaper, saw the sign, and froze mid-bend. He stood there for a full minute, his mouth hanging open, before he scrambled back inside, presumably to sound the alarms. Next came Mrs. Gable, my elderly neighbor on the right. She was a sweet woman who mostly kept to herself. She shuffled out onto her porch, watering can in hand, saw the sign, and squinted. She put on her glasses, read it, and then a slow, wonderful smile spread across her face. She looked over at me, gave me a conspiratorial thumbs up, and went back to watering her petunias. I had an ally. The main event, however, was yet to come. At 10:45 a.m., on the dot, Carol Ann's front door opened. She emerged, dressed for another day of enforcing aesthetic tyranny, holding her car keys. She took 3 steps down her pristine walkway, and then she saw it. The reaction was not what I expected. There was no screaming, no shouting, no immediate call to the authorities. It was something far more terrifying. She just stopped. Her keys slipped from her grasp and clattered onto the concrete. Her face, which was usually a carefully controlled mask of disapproval, went through a rapid, silent series of transformations. First, confusion, as her brain tried to process the impossible image before her. Then, disbelief, as she read the words, her lips moving silently. Then came denial, a slight shake of the head. That was followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated rage that turned her skin a blotchy, alarming shade of red. Finally, all emotion drained away, replaced by a cold, silent, apocalyptic fury. She stared at my sign. She stared at my house. She stared at my front window, where I was shamelessly peeking through the blinds. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. Then, without a word, she turned, walked back into her house, and slammed the door with a force that rattled the silverware wind chime on my porch. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The quiet lasted for exactly 1 hour and 12 minutes. I had just enough time to make a celebratory sandwich and pour myself a glass of iced tea when I saw the flashing lights. A police cruiser was pulling up to my curb. My heart did a little pitter-patter of anxiety mixed with exhilaration. It was showtime. 2 officers got out. One was young, with a fresh-out-of-the-academy haircut and an earnest, rule-following expression. The other was older, with a weary face that said he'd seen every kind of stupid this town had to offer and was no longer surprised by any of it. They approached my porch with the slow, deliberate pace of men who were not thrilled about their current assignment. I opened the door before they had a chance to knock. "Good morning, officers," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" The young one, whose name tag read Miller, cleared his throat. "Sir, are you Leo Maxwell?" "The one and only." "Sir, we've had a complaint," Miller said, trying to sound official while simultaneously avoiding eye contact with the giant chicken sign behind him. He glanced at his notepad, then back at me. "A complaint about, a sign." "My sign?" I feigned surprise. "Is there a problem with it? I thought it was very tastefully designed." The older officer, Johnson, stepped forward. He had a magnificent mustache and a twinkle in his eye that he was trying very hard to suppress. "Son," he said, his voice a low rumble, "the complainant, a Miss Carol Ann Higgins, seems to be under the impression that your sign constitutes a public nuisance." He gestured over his shoulder with his thumb. "She also mentioned something about property values." "Ah, yes, that old chestnut," I said, taking a sip of my iced tea. "Well, I can assure you, officers, this is simply an announcement for a future community attraction. Think of the tourism dollars. People will come from all over to see the world's largest rubber chicken. It'll put Maple Creek on the map." Miller looked utterly bewildered. "Sir, are you actually building a giant chicken?" "It's in the preliminary planning stages," I said with a straight face. "The Maxwell Foundation is still sourcing a suitable squeaker. It's a complex acoustical engineering problem." Officer Johnson coughed, a sound that was suspiciously close to a laugh. He stroked his mustache. "Son, does this foundation of yours have a permit for chicken construction?" Here was the moment I'd been waiting for. The legal checkmate. "As I understand it, officer, you don't need a permit to plan something. The sign is on my private property. I looked up the city ordinances. It meets the size and setback requirements for a temporary sign. And I checked the HOA bylaws. There's a lot in there about fence heights and approved shades of taupe, but surprisingly, there is no rule specifically banning signs announcing future construction of colossal novelty toys." Miller looked at Johnson, completely out of his depth. Johnson just sighed, a long, weary exhalation that spoke of 1,000 petty neighborhood disputes. He knew I was right. There was nothing they could do. "All right, Mr. Maxwell," Johnson said, tipping his hat. "You seem to have your ducks or chickens in a row. We can't force you to take it down." He took a step closer and lowered his voice slightly. "But listen, for my sake, try to keep the neighborhood disputes from escalating, will you? I've got actual work to do." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at the sign. "For the record," he said, a genuine grin finally breaking through, "that is a damn fine-looking chicken." He and Miller got back in their car. As they drove away, I could see Johnson shaking his head and laughing. Round one went to me. I went back inside, my sandwich tasting like sweet, sweet victory. The police visit was just the opening salvo. The real war, I soon discovered, would be fought online. Mr. Henderson, Carol Ann's scowling deputy, had apparently taken high-resolution photos of the sign and posted them to the official Maple Creek Community Facebook group. His caption read, "Some people have no respect for our neighborhood. What is our HOA going to do about this?" The post exploded. Within an hour, it had over 100 comments. I sat on my couch, scrolling through the carnage with a morbid sense of fascination. The community was split right down the middle, a digital civil war erupting in real time. There was, of course, Team Karen. "This is absolutely disgraceful," one comment read. "My children have to see this on their way to school. It's tacky and lowers the tone for all of us." Another wrote, "I'm calling my realtor right now. This is going to destroy our property values. Thank you, Leo Maxwell." They used my full name like I was some kind of wanted criminal. But then there was the other side. My side. Team Leo. Their comments were a beautiful balm to my soul. "OMG, this is the funniest thing I've ever seen," one person wrote. "That HOA has been on a power trip for years. Good for him." Another chimed in. "Honestly, a giant rubber chicken would be a massive improvement over another beige McMansion. I, for one, welcome our new poultry overlord." Someone even made a meme of my chicken sign with the caption, "Not all heroes wear capes." My phone started buzzing with notifications. Friends I hadn't heard from in years were sharing the post, adding comments like, "I know this guy. This is the most Leo thing he's ever done." Dave called me, acting as my unofficial PR manager. "Dude, you're a local celebrity. You're trending. People are driving by your house." He was right. I peeked outside and saw a minivan slow to a crawl in front of my house. A woman in the passenger seat leaned out and took a picture with her phone before speeding off, laughing. My little act of spite was becoming a public spectacle. It was both mortifying and absolutely addictively thrilling. My protest against the tyranny of beige had found its audience. The story quickly jumped from the confines of the Facebook group. A local blogger who specialized in quirky suburban news wrote a short piece titled, "Feathers Ruffled in Maple Creek as Resident Plans World's Largest Rubber Chicken." That's when my life got truly weird. The next morning, as I was contemplating whether I had enough clean socks to avoid doing laundry, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a young woman with a determined look in her eye and a microphone in her hand that had the local Channel 8 News logo on it. "Leo Maxwell?" she asked, a friendly but professional smile on her face. "I'm Chloe Garcia with Channel 8. We saw the story online about your unique project. Would you be willing to do an on-camera interview?" My brain short-circuited. An interview? On the news? This had escalated far beyond what I had anticipated. Dave's voice echoed in my head. "You're a local celebrity, dude. I couldn't back down now." "Of course," I said, trying to sound cool and composed. "The Maxwell Foundation is always happy to engage with the press." Chloe's smile widened. She clearly found this as amusing as everyone else, but she was a pro. We stood on my lawn, the magnificent sign positioned perfectly between us. Her cameraman gave a thumbs up, and Chloe launched into her questions. "So, Mr. Maxwell," she began, "what prompted this ambitious undertaking?" I looked directly into the camera. For years, the Maxwell Foundation has felt that the world of monumental roadside attractions has been dominated by big fruit, giant balls of twine. We felt it was time for poultry to have its moment. And why here, in Maple Creek? "This was my grandfather's house," I said, allowing a note of genuine sincerity into my voice. "He was a man who believed in joy, in whimsy. He always said this neighborhood could use a little more color. I see this as honoring his legacy." It was a complete lie, but it sounded great. "Your neighbors, particularly the HOA, have expressed concerns," Chloe prompted. "Progress is often met with resistance," I said sagely. "Some people see an empty lot and see only conformity. We see a 50-foot-tall beacon of squeaky joy. We believe that, in the end, the entire community will benefit from the sheer, unadulterated happiness that only a truly colossal rubber chicken can provide." The interview was a masterpiece of sincere nonsense. I was charming, I was witty, and I managed to not so subtly paint the HOA as a bunch of joyless bullies without ever saying so directly. After we wrapped up, Chloe said, "For the sake of a balanced story, I need to try and get a comment from the other side." She walked across the street and rang Carol Ann's doorbell. I watched from my porch, a fly on the wall of my own drama. Carol Ann opened the door, saw the camera, and her face contorted into a mask of pure rage. "No comment," she snarled, and slammed the door so hard that one of the perfectly pruned shrubs on her porch trembled. Chloe just sighed and walked back over to me. "Well?" she said with a wry smile. "I think I have my story." That night, my segment aired on the 6 o'clock news. There was I, the charming, eccentric visionary, talking about joy and my grandfather's legacy. And there was Carol Ann, represented by a slammed door and an angry, muffled shout. In the court of public opinion, it was a knockout. The news report was a declaration of war. A few days later, a certified letter arrived from the HOA's legal team. It was a formal cease and desist, printed on paper so thick it felt like it had been carved from stone. The letter was a symphony of legalese, but the gist was simple. The sign was a deliberate and fraudulent misrepresentation, as the HOA had confirmed that no building permits for any large-scale poultry structures had been filed with the city. They accused me of creating a malicious fiction intended to harass and devalue. I had 7 days to remove the sign, or they would pursue all available legal options, including suing me for damages. My blood ran cold. This was no longer just about fines for long grass. This was lawsuits and lawyers. This was real. I called Dave in a panic. "They're calling my bluff," I yelled into the phone. "They know I'm not actually building it. What do I do?" "Whoa, calm down," Dave said, ever the voice of chaotic reason. "They're trying to scare you. You just need to call their bluff." "How? By actually building a giant chicken? I don't have the money for that. I can barely afford my internet bill." "No, man. You just have to make it look like you're going to build it," he explained. "You need to take the next logical step. You need plans. You need an estimate. You need to hire a contractor." He was insane. He was also right. If I had a professional consultation, it would no longer be a malicious fiction. It would be a project in the exploratory phase. It was just enough of a legal fig leaf to keep me safe, for now. Finding a contractor willing to entertain this idea was not going to be easy. I couldn't just call up any old construction company. I needed someone special. After an hour of searching online for unconventional builders and weird architectural projects, I found him. Gus Kowalski. His website was a simple, no-frills page with pictures of his work. A custom-built treehouse that looked like a pirate ship, a backyard bar shaped like a giant tiki head, a surprisingly elegant shed made entirely from reclaimed bowling alley lanes. His slogan was, "If you can dream it, I can probably build it. No promises." I called him and arranged to meet at a local diner the next day. Gus was exactly what I'd hoped for. He was a man in his late 50s with a formidable belly, a beard that had bits of sawdust in it, and hands the size of dinner plates. He sat opposite me in the booth, nursing a black coffee, and looked at me with an expression of profound skepticism. "So," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "The kid from the news. Let me get this straight. You want me to give you a quote on a 50-foot-tall chicken?" "A rubber chicken, to be precise," I clarified, pushing a napkin sketch I'd drawn across the table. "I'm thinking a steel frame with a weatherproof, flexible vinyl skin. In the traditional shade of yellow, of course." Gus stared at my drawing. He didn't laugh. He didn't roll his eyes. He just looked at it with the serious concentration of a surgeon examining an X-ray. He picked up the napkin, held it closer, and squinted. "Steel frame is the way to go, yeah?" he grunted, taking a long sip of his coffee. "You'd need deep concrete footings for a structure that tall, especially with the wind load. The skin, vinyl's okay, but you'd need specialized fabrication. It's the squeaker that's the real problem." I blinked. "The squeaker?" "Yeah," he said, now fully engaged. "The acoustics on a squeaker that size. It's a challenge. You can't just scale it up. The air pressure required would be immense. You'd probably need a dedicated air compressor system. And the sound, it would probably break windows for a 3-block radius." He stroked his beard thoughtfully. "It's an interesting engineering problem." I stared at him, dumbfounded. He was taking this seriously. He wasn't just humoring me. He was actively problem-solving the construction of a giant window-shattering rubber chicken. "So, you'll do it?" I asked, a sense of disbelief washing over me. "You'll draw up some plans? Give me an estimate?" Gus finally looked up from the napkin, and a slow grin spread across his grizzled face. "Kid, I spend most of my days building boring decks for people who argue about the price of cedar planks. A chance to design a 50-foot-tall public nuisance? It's the most exciting thing that's happened to me all year." He folded the napkin carefully and stuck it in his shirt pocket. "I'll draw you up some preliminary plans and a materials estimate. And because I like your style, I'll only charge you $500, just for the story." I had found my Michelangelo. Gus Kowalski, the patron saint of absurd construction, had joined the cause. With Gus on board, I had a newfound confidence. I had my lawyer, well, Dave's cousin who was in law school, draft a response to the HOA. It was a masterpiece of polite defiance, stating that the Maxwell Foundation was in the preliminary design and consultation phase with a licensed contractor and that their accusations of fraud were baseless and defamatory. I attached a copy of my invoice from Gus. Checkmate. Carol Ann, however, was not one to be deterred by logic or legal maneuvering. If she couldn't win the war, she would settle for a campaign of relentless attrition. The HOA notices started arriving daily. They were delivered with a crisp, satisfying thwack into my mailbox, each one a little paper-based missile of hate. I was fined $50 because my trash can was visible from the street for 3 hours before the approved time. I was fined $75 for a small patch of oil on my driveway left by Dave's ancient car. My favorite, though, was the $100 fine for unapproved lawn ornamentation, complete with a blurry, zoomed-in photo of the gnome with the fishing pole. Apparently, his tiny act of rebellion was now a costly one. It was psychological warfare. Every time I left my house, I felt her eyes on me from across the street. I saw her talking in hushed, urgent tones with Mr. Henderson on the sidewalk, both of them occasionally glaring in my direction. She was trying to turn the neighborhood against me, to isolate me, to make my life so miserable that I would finally give in, tear down the sign, and paint my door beige. But a funny thing was happening. For every glare I got from one of Carol Ann's cronies, I got a subtle nod or a friendly wave from someone else. People started leaving little rubber ducks on my porch steps, small tokens of solidarity. Mrs. Gable brought me a plate of cookies, whispering, "You keep fighting the good fight, dearie." The more Carol Ann tried to tighten her grip, the more the neighborhood seemed to delight in her frustration. Her war on my house was backfiring. She wasn't isolating me, she was isolating herself. The fines and the glares were one thing, but Carol Ann soon escalated to her final nuclear option. She leveraged her power as HOA president to gather signatures on a petition. She didn't frame it as being about my sign. Oh no, she was too clever for that. The petition was to bring a proposal before the city council to clarify and enforce zoning ordinances regarding non-traditional structures and public nuisances. It was a transparent attempt to get the city to do her dirty work, to create a new law specifically to outlaw my theoretical chicken. The matter was officially scheduled for the next city council meeting in 2 weeks. This was it, the final showdown. The news sent a jolt of genuine fear through me. This wasn't the HOA anymore. This was the government. They had the power to shut me down for good. I called an emergency council of war at my house. It consisted of me, Dave, and Gus, who showed up with a roll of actual blueprints under his arm. "It's a classic pincer move," Dave said, pacing my living room and eating pizza. "She's trying to outmaneuver you by changing the rules of the game." "She might just do it," I said, slumping onto the couch. "What are we going to do?" Gus, who had been quietly examining my grandfather's ship in a bottle, unrolled his blueprints on my coffee table. They were magnificent. He had drawn a full structural diagram of the chicken, complete with cross-sections, stress calculations, and detailed notes on the squeaker's pneumatic system. "We don't fight her on her turf," Gus said, his voice a low growl. "Property values, nuisances, that's her language. We fight her on my turf." He tapped a section of the city's zoning code he had printed out. "I've been reading, and I found something interesting." He pointed to a little-known dusty ordinance from the 1970s designed to encourage tourism. It provided a massive loophole for the construction of roadside attractions and works of folk art. "It's not a building," Gus said, a sly grin on his face. "It's not a non-traditional structure. It's a sculpture. It's art." A new hope began to dawn. While we were strategizing, my phone buzzed. It was Chloe, the reporter. "I saw the city council agenda," she said. "This is getting serious. Do you have a plan?" "We're working on it," I told her. "We think we have an angle." "Good," she said, "because your supporters are mobilizing." She sent me a link. A Facebook group had popped up, the Friends of the Giant Rubber Chicken. It already had over 500 members. They were organizing a yellow out for the council meeting, encouraging people to show up wearing yellow to support my cause. The battle lines were drawn. On one side, Carol Ann Higgins, the forces of beige, and the crushing power of bureaucracy. On my side, a sarcastic graphic designer, a chaos-loving best friend, a grizzled contractor with a legal loophole, and an army of yellow-clad citizens ready to fight for their right to squeak. The night of the city council meeting, the atmosphere in the town hall was electric. It felt less like a municipal proceeding and more like a heavyweight championship fight. The room was divided into two distinct, warring factions. On the right side sat Carol Ann and her supporters, a sea of khaki, navy blue, and, of course, beige. They sat ramrod straight, clutching copies of the HOA bylaws like holy texts. On the left side was my army. It was a glorious, chaotic sea of yellow. People wore yellow t-shirts, yellow hats, even yellow feather boas. One guy had a full-body banana costume on. Mrs. Gable was there in a lovely lemon-colored cardigan, holding a small rubber duck. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The meeting droned on with tedious procedural matters until, finally, our item was called. Proposal to clarify zoning ordinances. The mayor, a man with the perpetually tired look of someone who has heard every complaint imaginable, invited Carol Ann to the podium to speak. She strode to the microphone, radiating an aura of righteous certainty. She began her speech calmly, talking about the importance of community standards, of protecting the investments of homeowners, of maintaining the peaceful, orderly character of Maple Creek. It was a well-rehearsed, reasonable-sounding argument. But then she turned her attention to me. Her voice grew tighter, sharper. "But recently," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "these standards have been mocked. Our community has been made the subject of a tasteless, childish prank." She pointed a finger in my direction. "That man, Leo Maxwell, has erected a monument to his own immaturity on his front lawn, threatening to build a grotesque carnival attraction in the heart of our residential neighborhood." She was losing the crowd. A few of her supporters nodded grimly, but the rest of the room was shifting uncomfortably. Her voice rose in pitch, becoming more shrill with every word. "This isn't about freedom of expression. This is about respect. This is about decency. This is about property values. If you allow this to proceed, what's next? A giant hot dog? A Ferris wheel in every backyard? We must draw the line." She finished, red-faced and panting slightly, to a smattering of polite applause from her side of the room. Then, the mayor called my name. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Dave gave me a reassuring pat on the back. I walked to the podium, the expectant faces of the entire room fixed on me. I took a deep breath. "Good evening," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "My name is Leo Maxwell, and yes, I am the man with the chicken sign." A wave of laughter rippled through my supporters. "Carol Ann, Miss Higgins," I corrected myself, "talks about standards and rules. And she's not wrong. They have their place. But a community isn't just a collection of bylaws and property values. A community is people." I looked out at the sea of yellow. "My house, yeah, it's a little rough around the edges. I inherited it from my grandfather. He wasn't a man who cared much about approved shades of beige. He was a man who built wind chimes out of his wife's silverware because he loved the sound it made. He painted the front door purple because it made him happy." My voice grew stronger, more confident. "This whole thing didn't start because I wanted to build a giant chicken. It started because my neighbor told me that my grief, my memories, my grandfather's legacy was an eyesore. She told me it was bringing everyone down. But I've learned something in the last few weeks. A little bit of color, a little bit of absurdity. It doesn't bring people down. It brings them together." I gestured to the room. "Look around. This silly chicken joke has gotten more neighbors talking to each other than the annual HOA potluck ever did." "I don't know if I'm actually going to build a 50-foot rubber chicken," I admitted. "But I do know that I will fight for my right to be a little bit different. And I'll fight for my neighbor's right to be a little bit different too, because a neighborhood should have character, not just regulations." I finished to a roar of applause and cheers from the yellow side of the room. As I sat down and the council began to deliberate, Gus stood up. "Point of clarification, Mr. Mayor," he rumbled. The mayor nodded. Gus strode to the podium, my blueprints in his hand. "The proposal before you is about zoning for structures, but what my client is proposing isn't a structure." He unrolled the blueprint with a dramatic snap. "It's a work of art, and per City Ordinance 74B, folk art and roadside attractions are not only permitted, they are encouraged. This chicken," he said, tapping the drawing, "is a sculpture. And for the record," he looked directly at the council members, "my guys would love to build it. We're sick of beige." The room erupted. The banana costume guy was on his feet, cheering. Gus's folk art loophole, combined with my heartfelt plea and the overwhelming public support, was the final nail in Carol Ann's beige coffin. The mayor banged his gavel. "Given the existing ordinances," he declared, a hint of a smile on his face, "and the spirited public response, the council sees no need to clarify zoning at this time. This is a private property matter. Petition dismissed." The room exploded. We had won. The victory party was held at a local bar, and it was legendary. Gus was treated like a conquering hero, with people buying him beers and asking him to autograph their napkins. Dave was acting like my campaign manager, giving exaggerated retellings of our struggle to anyone who would listen. Chloe was there, officially off the clock, and she bought me a celebratory drink. "You were really great up there," she said, her smile genuine. "You actually made me believe in the power of the chicken." "It's a powerful symbol," I said, laughing. There was a definite spark between us, an easy chemistry that had been building since that first interview on my lawn. We all stayed late, a weird, wonderful collection of people brought together by a shared victory over suburban tyranny. The next morning, nursing a slight headache, I was drinking coffee on my porch when I saw a moving truck. It was parked in front of the house at the end of the block, the one Carol Ann had been so worried about. A young family was moving in. The for sale sign now had a big sold sticker slapped across it. The house had sold during the peak of the media frenzy, and I later heard from Mrs. Gable that it had gone for $10,000 over the asking price. As I was contemplating the irony, Carol Ann's front door opened. She came out to get her newspaper. She saw the moving truck. She saw the sold sign. Her entire argument, the very foundation of her crusade, had been demonstrably, publicly proven false. She looked up, and saw me watching her. Our eyes met across the street. For the first time, I didn't see anger or disapproval in her face. I just saw defeat. A tired, hollow emptiness. The war was over, and she had lost. There was no victory speech, no gloating. I just gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. She stared for a moment longer, then turned and walked back inside her perfect beige house, closing the door softly behind her. A few weeks passed. Life in Maple Creek found a new normal. The giant sign was still on my lawn, but it had transformed from a symbol of protest into a beloved local landmark. Tourists, and I use that term loosely, still occasionally stopped to take pictures. I finally got around to fixing up the house. Not because the HOA told me to, but because I wanted to. I scraped off the old, peeling paint and gave it a fresh coat. I hired a landscaper to help me tame the biodiversity project into something that was both beautiful and intentionally wild. I kept the silverware wind chime, of course, and I painted the front door an even brighter, more unapologetic shade of purple. The house was no longer just my grandfather's legacy. It was becoming my own. One sunny Saturday afternoon, I was sitting on my porch when Gus's truck pulled up. He lumbered up the steps, a new roll of blueprints under his arm. "Got the final designs," he grunted, spreading them out on my porch table. Chloe, who was over for lunch, leaned in to look. We weren't building a 50-foot chicken. After the council meeting, the Friends of the Giant Rubber Chicken Facebook group had turned into a legitimate community action committee. We'd launched a Kickstarter to build a new creative playground for the dilapidated local park, and thanks to the news story going viral, we had raised over $50,000. Gus's new blueprints showed a fantastic, whimsical design, full of color and strange shapes, a world away from the splintery wood and rusty chains that were there now. And right in the center, the centerpiece of the whole park, was a magnificent 10-foot-tall, bright yellow, rideable rubber chicken. It was designed with a heavy-duty internal bellow system. It was built to squeak. My phone rang. It was Dave. "So, did you ever decide?" he asked. "Is the world's largest rubber chicken officially a go?" I looked at the plans on the table. I looked at Chloe, who was smiling at me. I looked out at my beautiful, weird, purple-doored house, and across the street, at Mrs. Gable tending her flowers. The neighborhood didn't feel beige anymore. It felt like home. "No," I said into the phone, a grin spreading across my face. "I'm not building the world's largest rubber chicken." I paused for effect. "I'm building a slightly smaller but way more awesome one for the kids." So, in the end, I didn't get my 50-foot monument to pettiness. Instead, I got something much better. I discovered that sometimes the best way to increase a property's value isn't to enforce 1,000,000 rules, but to add a little bit of character, a little bit of joy, and if necessary, a whole lot of squeak.